The doorbell rang out, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet of my evening like a knife. I'd been sitting there, half watching a football game, my mind drifting aimlessly, not really focused on anything. But that sound, the unexpected chime, snapped me out of my haze instantly. Nobody ever came to my place. Hardly anyone even knew where I lived. Yet here was someone outside, ringing my doorbell. My curiosity piqued, and I hesitated for a second, weighing my options. I could just ignore it, pretend I wasn't home, and hope they went away. But then again, what if it was someone important? With a sigh, I pushed myself off the couch and headed for the door, a strange mix of irritation and unease settling in. Peeking through the small peephole, I froze. Of all people, it had to be her. Danielle, my ex-wife, stood there, like time hadn't passed, like she had every right to be at my doorstep. But time had passed. A lot of it. We hadn't spoken a single word since the day I walked out. No phone calls. No letters. Nothing. I had done everything I could to leave that part of my life behind, to forget her, to move on. For a moment, I seriously considered just walking away from the door and letting her knock or ring the bell until she got bored and left. But I knew Danielle better than that, she wouldn't leave until she got what she came for. With another sigh, I unlocked the deadbolt, unhooked the safety chain, and cracked the door open just enough to see her face. "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to hide the annoyance in my voice. She looked up at me, calm but with a determined look in her eyes. "I want to talk, Nick." "Talk? After all these years?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "Danielle, if my leaving didn't make it clear that I never wanted to see you again, I don't know what will. You have no idea what you're walking into." Her expression shifted, and she blinked, confused. "I don't understand why you left, Nick. I came home one day, and you were just gone. No note, no explanation. Nothing." Her words hit me like a slap. I had expected some kind of denial, but not this. "You can't be serious. You really don't know why I left." My voice was rising, my anger bubbling up to the surface. "I told you, Danielle. The night you decided to walk out that door, I warned you what would happen if you went through with it." Danielle's brow furrowed, but she stayed silent, waiting. I wasn't ready for this, not at all, but I knew there was no avoiding it now. Without another word, I stepped aside and let her in. She walked in slowly, glancing around as if surprised at how little my place had changed since we'd been together. She sank onto the couch like she still had every right to be there, like she hadn't blown up our lives. "Can I get a glass of water?" she asked, her voice soft, almost polite. I gave a slight nod, though a surge of resentment rose up inside me. As I walked into the kitchen, the memories I'd worked so hard to bury rushed back, overwhelming me. It had all started that night, the night she chose to go to that party. I had come home from work, dead tired, looking forward to a quiet evening. But instead, there she was, dressed to the nines, like she was headed out for some hot date. I should have seen the warning signs right there, but I brushed it off, assuming it was just one of those nights where she wanted to look good for whatever reason. "I didn't know we had plans," I'd said, tossing my work bag by the door. "We don't," she replied, smoothing out the front of her dress. "I've got a date tonight." I'd laughed, thinking she was joking. "A date? With who?" "You don't know him. His name's Jason. He's new at work, doesn't know many people yet, so he asked me to go with him to a coworker's birthday party." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "A guy from work? Danielle, does he know you're married?" She rolled her eyes at me like I was being ridiculous. "It's just a party, Nick. Nothing is going to happen," she had said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Are you kidding me?" I had shot back, my temper flaring. "You're going to a party, dressed like that, with another guy, and you seriously think it's no big deal?" Her voice became sharp, defensive. It's not what you think. You never want to go to these parties with me, and I hate going alone. You know that. I stood there, completely stunned by how casually she said it, like I was supposed to be okay with all of this. Danielle, I've told you before, I can't stand being around those people, especially your friend Brittany. You know what kind of person she is. I don't trust her, and frankly, I don't like how she's influencing you. Brittany had been divorced 4 times, each time after cheating on her husbands. She threw these wild, out-of-control parties, the kind where drugs were passed around like candy. I had heard enough from mutual friends about what really went down at those parties. They weren't just get-togethers. By the end of the night, they turned into free-for-all hookups, and Brittany had been trying to pull Danielle into that lifestyle for years. Danielle just stood there, staring at me like I was the unreasonable one. Brittany's my best friend, Nick. I'm not going to cut her out of my life just because you don't like her. You don't get it, do you? I had said, shaking my head in frustration. It's not just about Brittany. It's about what happens at those parties. You're stepping into something that could wreck everything we've built. If you go, you're telling me this marriage means nothing to you. Danielle sighed, already halfway out the door. You're being ridiculous. This won't hurt us. But it did. The moment she walked out, I knew things between us would never be the same. As I poured the water in the kitchen, all the anger I had tried to suppress started bubbling up again, that same bitterness that had pushed me to leave her in the first place. I had warned her, but she hadn't listened. And now here she was, sitting on my couch like nothing had happened, like she could just stroll back into my life and pick up right where we left off. I handed her the glass of water, watching as she took a small sip, her eyes never leaving mine. I know why you left, she said quietly, finally breaking the silence. I know now. But it wasn't what you thought, Nick. It was never what you thought. I raised an eyebrow, more than a little skeptical. Then enlighten me. Danielle took a deep breath, her hands trembling a little as she placed the glass down on the table. I could see her struggling to find the right words, but my patience was already wearing thin. I wasn't in the mood for excuses or her attempts to rewrite what happened. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. You think I went to that party because I wanted to, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. But you don't understand what was really going on. I crossed my arms and leaned back against the wall, keeping my eyes on her. Go on. I'm listening. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, almost pleading. Brittany, I don't know how to say this, but she'd been pushing me for years to get involved in her lifestyle. You knew that much, I'm sure. But what you don't know is, I never wanted any part of it. I always said no, Nick. Every single time. I frowned, not entirely convinced. And yet, you still went to her parties, still hung around her like it was no big deal. Danielle shook her head quickly, her frustration growing. I went because she was my friend. I never thought it would go as far as it did, she said, her voice shaky. That night, she tricked me, Nick. Brittany asked me to wear that dress to make Jason think he had a shot with me. I didn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. Too late. I echoed, my anger flaring up again. What does that even mean, Danielle? Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept going. After the party started, I knew something was off. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. At first, I thought it was just the drinks, but it wasn't. I didn't know it at the time, but Brittany had slipped something into my drink, some kind of drug. She wanted to make sure I would go along with whatever happened next. Her words made my stomach turn, but I kept my face blank, not letting any of my emotions show. So, what are you trying to say? That you were drugged? That's your excuse. Danielle nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. I swear to you, Nick, I didn't go there to cheat on you. I never would have done that. But after the drug kicked in, everything became a blur. I barely remember anything from that night, but I woke up the next morning in one of Brittany's bedrooms, and I wasn't alone. Her confession hung heavy in the air between us, suffocating the space with its weight. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to wrap my mind around what she was telling me. A part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she was a victim in all of this. But there was another part of me, the part that had been betrayed and crushed, that couldn't overlook the fact that she had walked out that night, fully aware of the damage it would do to our marriage. "You think that changes anything?" I finally asked, my voice cold and unfeeling. "You still made the choice to go, Danielle. I warned you what would happen if you walked out that door, and you did it anyway." She shook her head, her face desperate. "I thought you were overreacting, Nick. I thought it was just another one of our stupid fights, that I'd come home and we'd work things out like we always did. I never imagined it would turn into this." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "You never imagined, huh? That's exactly the problem, Danielle. You never think about the consequences. You've always been so wrapped up in your own little world, convinced nothing bad could ever happen to you. And now here you are, trying to paint yourself as the victim, hoping I'll just forgive you and take you back." Her face crumpled at my words, and for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. But I pushed it aside. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. "I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness," she said softly, her voice barely holding together. "I came here to tell you the truth. I know it doesn't change anything, but you deserve to know that I never wanted any of this." I shook my head, the weight of years of resentment settling in my chest. "It's too late, Danielle. You should have thought about all this before you walked out that door. You knew exactly what Brittany was like. Hell, I knew what she was like, and I warned you. But you didn't listen. You never listened." Danielle wiped at her tears, trying to compose herself. "I've spent years thinking about that night, about everything I could have done differently. I know I can't undo what happened, but I need you to understand, I never meant to hurt you." Her words, no matter how sincere, only deepened the bitterness inside me. I had heard enough. I'd spent years trying to forget that night, trying to rebuild my life from the wreckage of our broken marriage. And now here she was, standing in front of me, dragging all those old wounds back to the surface, expecting me to feel sorry for her. But I wasn't the man I used to be. I had moved on. I had built a new life, one that didn't include her. I pushed off the wall, standing tall as I looked down at her. "Danielle, I'm done with this conversation. I don't care about your excuses or your regrets. The bottom line is, you made your choice when you walked out that door, and I made mine when I left you. There's nothing left to discuss." She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and pain. "You can't mean that, Nick. You can't just throw everything away like it was nothing." "I already have," I said firmly, turning my back on her. "Now, you need to leave." Danielle sat there, stunned. I could see the disbelief in her eyes as my words finally hit home. She was so used to getting her way, to me eventually giving in. But not this time. Not anymore. I wasn't about to let her worm her way back into my life after everything that had happened. For a long, agonizing moment, she didn't move. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd accept that it was really over and walk out. But instead, she stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was still processing what I had said. She walked toward me, and for a brief second, I thought she might reach out to touch my arm, but she stopped just short. "Nick, I understand you're angry. I get it," she said, her voice soft. "But I need you to really hear me. What happened that night, it wasn't what you think. Brittany set me up. She drugged me. I didn't have control over anything that happened." I turned to face her, my jaw clenched tight. "You keep saying that like it changes something. It doesn't. The fact is, you went to that party, dressed like that, knowing exactly how I felt about Brittany and her crowd. That's what ended us. You made a choice, Danielle, and it wasn't me. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I couldn't find it in me to care. I'd seen enough of her tears to last a lifetime. She had cried when I left her too, but even then, those tears hadn't been enough to make me stay. She took a shaky breath, her voice trembling. I was scared, Nick. Scared of what my life had turned into. Scared of losing myself. Brittany offered me a way out. She made it seem fun, like it would take away all the pressure I was feeling. I was stupid, I know that now. But I never meant for things to go that far. I shook my head, unable to hold back the frustration that had been building inside me for so long. Danielle, it doesn't matter. You keep trying to come up with excuses, but the bottom line is you walked out on me. You chose her over us, over what we had. And now you expect me to just forgive and forget. Life doesn't work like that. Her face crumpled at my words, and for a second, I thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. But then she straightened up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Nick. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know the truth. Yes, I was drugged, but I was also terrified of what my life had become. I was afraid that if I didn't take that chance, I'd lose everything. I let out a bitter, hollow laugh. And how did that work out for you, Danielle? You went to that party, got drugged, and lost everything anyway. She winced at my words, but I didn't ease up. I had been holding on to this anger for years, and now that she was standing in front of me, I wasn't going to let her off easy. You think you can just show up here, spill your sob story, and what? I'll take you back. Pretend like none of this ever happened. That's not going to happen. Danielle opened her mouth to say something, but the words died on her lips. She looked down at the floor, her hands wringing together as if she was trying to muster the strength to keep going. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. I came here because I had to try. I needed to see if there was any chance, any hope, that we could fix things. I stared at her, completely baffled. Fix things? Danielle, we're beyond fixing. There's nothing left to salvage. You shattered us the moment you walked out that door. She shook her head, a small, desperate smile tugging at her lips. You're wrong, Nick. We were broken long before that night. That night was just the breaking point. We'd been falling apart for a long time, and deep down, you know that. Her words hit me hard, like a punch I hadn't seen coming. As much as I wanted to deny it, there was some truth in what she said. Those last few months before I left hadn't exactly been great. There had been tension, arguments, and an emotional distance we hadn't bothered to address. But none of that changed the fact that she had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. You're right, I said slowly, my voice hardening again. We were falling apart. But instead of trying to fix it, you went to a party with another man. You chose to walk away. I made a mistake, she whispered, her eyes full of desperation as she pleaded with me. A terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you, Nick. Even after everything that happened, I never stopped. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she had hoped for. Love? After everything we'd been through, that word felt empty. It wasn't even something I recognized anymore when it came to us. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. Love? You think love is enough to fix this? Love didn't stop you from walking out that night. Love didn't stop you from going to that party. Love didn't stop you from betraying me, Danielle. She flinched, her hands falling to her sides as she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I know I hurt you, she said softly, her voice trembling. I know I made mistakes. But I'm here now, trying to make things right. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Make things right? There's no making this right. You can't just erase the past, Danielle. What's done is done. She swallowed hard, her eyes welling up with tears again. I know. But I had to try. I had to see if there was any part of you that still cared. Any part of you willing to give us another chance. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Once, I had cared, more than I ever thought I could. But that was a long time ago, before everything fell apart. Now, all I felt was a cold emptiness where that love had once been. I've moved on, I said, my voice steady and firm. You should too. Danielle stood there, absorbing the weight of my words. The tears had slowed, but that haunted, desperate look in her eyes remained. For a moment, the room felt like it was closing in on us, the silence between us heavy and suffocating as the reality of what I'd said sank in. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. I didn't realize you'd moved on, Nick. I thought, maybe, after all this time, you might still. Her voice trailed off, as if finishing the sentence would make everything too real, too final. I shook my head, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. I told you before, Danielle. The day you walked out that door, everything changed. I warned you, and you didn't listen. I had no choice but to move on. Her gaze dropped to the floor, her hands fidgeting nervously. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Who is she?" I frowned, caught off guard by the question. What? I asked, caught off guard. She looked up at me, and for the first time since she had arrived, there was something sharp in her eyes. Who's the woman you moved on with? You said you've moved on, so who is she? I stepped back, surprised by the directness in her tone. That's none of your business. Her lips tightened into a thin line, and she let out a bitter laugh. None of my business. I'm still your wife, Nick. Maybe not in your eyes, but legally, we're still married. So, yes, it kind of is my business. I could feel my patience slipping. This was not the direction I wanted this conversation to take. I had hoped she'd get the hint, leave quietly, and not drag this out. But now, she was pushing, prying into a part of my life that didn't concern her anymore. It doesn't matter who she is, I said firmly. What matters is that I've moved on, and you should too. Danielle's eyes narrowed, her anger bubbling to the surface. You can't just dismiss me like that, Nick. You can't pretend I never existed, like what we had never meant anything. My jaw clenched, frustration mounting. What we had ended the night you left, Danielle. That was your decision, not mine. She shook her head and stepped closer, refusing to back down. No, Nick. You made the choice to walk out. I tried to explain myself, but you never gave me the chance. You just packed up and disappeared. You left me with nothing. I could feel my fists tightening at my sides. She was twisting everything, trying to paint me as the one who abandoned her, like I was the one who gave up. But that wasn't the truth. The reality was, she had walked away from me long before I ever left. You really believe this is all on me? I asked, my voice low and sharp. You think I'm the one who left you with nothing? You're the one who went to that party with another man. You're the one who ignored every warning I gave you. You're the one who walked away from our marriage. I thought you were being irrational, she shouted, her face flushed with anger. I thought you were overreacting, Nick. I never believed it would get to this point. Well, it did, I shot back. And now you have to live with that. For a moment, she just stood there, her chest rising and falling with emotion. Then, slowly, her shoulders slumped, and the anger seemed to drain from her. She looked away, her voice dropping to a whisper. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said quietly. I thought I could go to that party and come back, and everything would be fine. I never thought it would go so wrong. I watched her closely, wondering if she truly believed that. If she really thought things could have gone back to normal after what she'd done. But that was always Danielle, living in her own world where consequences were an afterthought. She always believed things would just magically work out, no matter the damage left in the wake. But life didn't work that way. Not anymore. I don't know what you were thinking, Danielle, I said, my voice steady. But the truth is, you destroyed us the moment you walked out that door. There's no going back. She nodded slowly, her face pale and drawn. I know that now, she whispered. But I wish you'd stayed. I wish you'd given me a chance to explain. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. A chance to explain what? That you were drugged and cheated on me anyway. That Brittany set you up. What would any of that have changed? She flinched, her eyes squeezing shut as if trying to block out the truth. I don't know, she admitted softly. I just wanted to fix things. You can't fix this, I said, shaking my head. You can't undo what's already been done. The room fell silent again, the weight of our conversation pressing down on both of us. Danielle stood there, her head bowed, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. I could tell she was barely holding it together, trying her best not to break down completely. But it was clear she was losing that fight. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice small and defeated. Is she here? She asked softly. I frowned, not quite understanding at first. Who? The woman, she said, her voice trembling. The one you've moved on with. Is she here? I hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, she's here. Danielle closed her eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath. I see. Just as the words left her mouth, the front door opened. I turned to see Megan walk in, her blonde hair catching the last of the evening light as she stepped into the room. She looked surprised to see Danielle, her gaze flicking between the two of us. Am I interrupting something? Megan asked, her voice calm but curious. I shook my head, though the tension in the air was thick. No, you're not. Danielle was just leaving. Danielle turned to look at Megan, her eyes widening as the reality of the situation hit her all at once. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the woman I had moved on with. Then, with a shaky smile, she forced herself to speak. So, this is the woman who replaced me, she said, her voice hollow. Megan, always gracious, stepped forward and offered Danielle a small, kind smile. I'm Megan, and no, I didn't replace anyone. Nick made his own choices, just like you did. Danielle's face crumpled slightly at Megan's words, but she nodded, as if accepting the truth. You're right, she whispered. We all make our choices. Megan glanced at me and then back at Danielle. I'll give you two a minute, she said gently before heading into the kitchen. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Meanwhile, Danielle stared at the spot where Megan had just been, her expression unreadable. I guess that's it, then, she said softly, turning back to face me. I guess. I lost. You lost the moment you walked out that door, I said, my voice firm. You just didn't realize it. Danielle stood there, stunned in the wake of Megan's calm but cutting words. Her face was pale, and her lips trembled. I could see the battle going on inside her, the realization hitting harder now that she had met the woman I had moved on with. She was processing it, struggling to accept that the door she thought might still be open was firmly shut. There was no coming back from this. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. I thought maybe, if I explained everything, if you knew the truth, we could at least try again. I thought I could fix this. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words, but also the weight of my own resolve. Danielle, this isn't something you can just fix with a few words. It's not about knowing the truth or not. It's about trust. You broke it. And once that trust is gone, no matter how much you want to fix things, sometimes it's beyond repair. She bit her lip, trying to hold back more tears. But you were everything to me. I was lost without you, Nick. Her words, raw and desperate, almost stirred something inside me. Almost. But the walls I had built around myself were too strong, too fortified after years of pain and resentment. I had given her everything, and when I needed her most, she left. The damage was done, and I was no longer the man she once knew. I used to feel that way too, I said quietly, the tension in my voice replaced with a calm certainty. But you made your choices, and I made mine. You have to understand, I can't go back to that place. I won't. Her eyes widened, the desperation in them clear now. Do you love her? The question caught me off guard. I had expected more anger, more pleading, but not this. Not something so direct, so vulnerable. I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wasn't sure if saying it would make things worse for her. Megan is important to me, I replied carefully, keeping my voice steady. She's a big part of my life now, and yes, I care about her deeply. Danielle closed her eyes, her breath coming out in short, shaky bursts. But you loved me once, Nick. We had something. You can't just erase that. I sighed, feeling the weight of the memories she was dredging up, memories that now seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. I did love you, Danielle. But love isn't enough when the trust is gone. Neither of us can change what happened. She shook her head, her voice cracking. I was drugged, Nick. I didn't do it willingly. I didn't betray you the way you think I did. The familiar sting of anger rose inside me, but I swallowed it down. We had been through this so many times, and it didn't matter anymore. I'm not saying you betrayed me on purpose, I said, keeping my tone firm but calm. But you put yourself in that situation. You made a choice to go, even after everything I told you. You chose that party over our marriage. Danielle stood there, shaking her head as the tears finally spilled over, but I could see the fight leaving her. She didn't have any more words, no more arguments left. She knew, deep down, that nothing could change what was done. It was hard to watch, seeing someone you once cared about unravel, but I stayed where I was, firm in my resolve. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence hung heavy, filled with all the things left unsaid and the years that had passed between us. Finally, she looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine, and I saw something raw and broken in her expression. Is there really no chance, she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the last shred of hope lingering between us. I looked at her, feeling the weight of her question, but I already knew the answer. I had known it since the day I left. No, Danielle. There's no chance. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded slowly, as if she was finally accepting the reality she had been avoiding since she rang my doorbell. She wiped her face with trembling hands and turned toward the door. Pausing for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob, she didn't look back. Goodbye, Nick, she said softly, her voice hollow, stripped of the energy and fire she had come in with earlier. Goodbye, Danielle, I replied, my voice calm and steady. That was it, the final word between us, the last piece that closed the chapter of our lives together. She opened the door and stepped out into the night, the cool air briefly sweeping into the apartment before the door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, listening to the echo of her departure, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness settle over me. It was over. Whatever thread had still connected us had been severed completely. I exhaled, feeling the tension leave my body as I turned away from the door. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. Just then, I heard soft, familiar footsteps, and I turned to see Megan walking back into the room. She looked at me with those steady blue eyes, the ones that had anchored me for the last couple of years. She didn't say anything right away, just watched me, gauging how I was doing. Is she gone? She asked after a moment, her voice quiet, full of understanding. Yeah, I nodded, running a hand through my hair. She's gone. Megan crossed the room and stood in front of me, her hand resting gently on my arm. How are you feeling? I sighed, shrugging slightly. Honestly? I'm not sure. It's strange. It feels like I finally closed a door I didn't even realize was still open. She gave me a soft smile, her fingers brushing against my arm. That's because you needed closure. It's only natural, Megan said softly. I looked down at her, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened, but also the lightness that came with knowing it was truly over. Yeah, I replied, my voice gentler now. I guess I did. Megan smiled, a little brighter this time. Come on, let's not dwell on it. You made your decision a long time ago. You chose to move forward. I nodded, appreciating her calm understanding and support. She was right. I had made that decision a while back. This was just the final step in truly closing that chapter for good. Yeah, I repeated, a small smile starting to form. You were right. Megan leaned up and pressed a soft kiss on my cheek. Let's go have dinner. You can tell me all about how you managed to survive dealing with your ex-wife without losing your mind. I chuckled, feeling the tension that had built up finally start to fade away. I'll definitely take you up on that. Together, we headed for the door, leaving the past behind us as we stepped into the cool night air. The future was waiting, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready for it. As the breeze brushed against my face, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. For years, I had been carrying the weight of what happened with Danielle, unanswered questions, unresolved anger. Even though I had told myself I had moved on, a part of me had always been waiting for this moment. For her to come back and try to explain. Now that it had finally happened, I felt lighter. Megan walked beside me, her hand brushing against mine, a gentle reminder of the life I had built since Danielle. She had always understood there were things I needed to work through, pieces of my past that hadn't quite settled. But she never pushed, never demanded anything I wasn't ready to give. That was part of what I loved about her. She let me come to terms with things in my own time. We walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the sound of our footsteps on the pavement the only noise breaking the quiet of the evening. With each step, the weight of the encounter with Danielle seemed to lift off my shoulders, the tension from earlier slowly melting away. After a while, Megan broke the silence, her voice soft but curious. So, was it as bad as you thought it'd be? I chuckled a little, shaking my head. Worse, in some ways. She still tried to explain everything, still tried to make it seem like it wasn't her fault. But I wasn't buying it. Not this time. Megan nodded thoughtfully. Do you think she really believed that? That she wasn't to blame? I shrugged. I think she wanted to believe it. Maybe she convinced herself that being drugged absolved her of any responsibility. But the truth is, it wasn't just about that one night. It was her choices that led to everything falling apart. Megan gave my hand a gentle squeeze, her warmth reassuring. You did the right thing, Nick. You can't carry that weight forever. You've got your life now, and she has hers. Her words were simple, but true. I had spent far too long letting the past hang over me like a storm cloud. It was time to let it go, once and for all. We reached the restaurant a few minutes later, the warm glow of light spilling out through the windows as we stepped inside. The scent of freshly baked bread and rich Italian spices filled the air, and I realized just how hungry I was. Megan glanced over at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I think you needed this, she said as we were shown to our table. What? Dinner? I teased, trying to lighten the mood. She chuckled. That too, but I meant closure. You needed to see her, to hear what she had to say, and to finally be done with it. I nodded, knowing she was right. Yeah, I did. And now that it's over, I feel, I don't know, free. Megan's smile widened as she reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. Good. That's how it should be. We ordered our food, and the conversation shifted into a comfortable rhythm, the earlier tension fading away. We talked about lighter things, plans for the weekend, the upcoming trip we'd been planning, and the latest updates from her work. Being with Megan felt effortless, natural. There was no drama, no unspoken tension, just the two of us, building something together that felt real and steady. As dinner came to an end, I leaned back in my chair, feeling satisfied and content. The restaurant had filled up around us, a quiet hum of conversation blending with the clinking of silverware and the soft music playing in the background. I glanced across the table at Megan, watching her as she sipped her wine, her eyes sparkling in the gentle light. "Thank you," I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. She looked up, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" "For being patient with me," I replied, my tone more serious now. "For understanding that I needed to work through all of this on my own terms, in my own time. You never pushed, and I really appreciate that." Megan smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Nick, I care about you. I always knew you'd come to terms with it when you were ready. I was just here to support you." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her. Megan was different from Danielle in so many ways, but the biggest difference was how steady and grounded she was. With her, I never felt like I had to chase anything or prove anything. It just felt right. We finished our meal and left the restaurant, the night air cool but refreshing as we walked back toward my apartment. The streets were quiet, most of the city winding down for the evening, and as we strolled side by side, I felt a calmness settle over me. As we neared my building, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come since those chaotic days with Danielle. Back then, everything had felt so out of control. I was angry, hurt, and confused, unsure of how to move forward. But now, standing here with Megan, I realized that I had found my way, even if it had taken longer than I'd expected. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had stayed?" Megan asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence as we reached the front door. I thought about her question for a moment, letting the memories flicker through my mind. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I don't regret leaving. I think if I'd stayed, I would have lost myself. The trust was gone. It wouldn't have worked." Megan nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad you did what you needed to do, even if it was hard." I smiled at her, warmth spreading through my chest. "I'm glad too." We entered the building and rode the elevator up to my floor, the quiet hum of the machinery the only sound. As we stepped into my apartment, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. Danielle was gone. The past was behind me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly live in the present. Megan turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "So, what now?" I smiled, pulling her close. "Now, we keep moving forward." She leaned into me, resting her head on my chest as I wrapped my arms around her. The future felt wide open, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, I was ready to embrace it. The quiet hum of the city at night was a familiar comfort as Megan and I stood in the doorway of my apartment, still wrapped in each other's arms. There was a sense of finality in the air, not just because Danielle had left, but because the years of unresolved tension and unanswered questions that had followed me like a shadow were finally gone. That shadow had lifted, and now I could focus on the life right in front of me. Megan pulled back slightly, looking up at me with her steady, knowing gaze. "You seem different," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Lighter." I smiled, realizing she was right. "I feel different. It's strange, you know. For so long, I thought I'd moved on, but I guess I was still holding on to something. I just needed to face it head on." She nodded, her hands resting gently on my chest. And now that you have. I exhaled, feeling the weight lift from my body for good. Now, I'm done with it. Danielle is part of the past, and that's where she's going to stay. I've got a new life now, and I'm ready to live it. Megan smiled, her eyes twinkling with that warmth I had come to count on. Good, because I'm here for all of it. We stood there for a moment, simply enjoying the quiet, the peace that seemed to have settled over everything. There was no rush, no need to fill the space with words, just the two of us, standing together in the stillness, knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it side by side. Eventually, Megan stepped back, slipping her hand into mine with a playful look. So, what do you want to do now? We could stay in, watch a movie, or... I don't know. I'm open to ideas. I chuckled, loving the way she always knew how to lighten the mood. Honestly, after today, something low-key sounds perfect. How about we just put on a movie and relax? She grinned and tugged me toward the couch. That sounds like the perfect plan. We settled in, the soft glow of the TV casting a warm light over the room as we scrolled through movie options. It was a simple thing, sitting on the couch with Megan, her head resting on my shoulder as we tried to decide what to watch. But it was in these moments I realized just how much my life had changed, and for the better. As the opening credits of some action movie we half-heartedly picked started rolling, my mind drifted back to Danielle for a brief second. Not in the same way it used to, not with anger or confusion. It was just a fleeting thought, a flicker of what once was, quickly replaced by the reality of what I had now. Danielle and I had been through a lot, and no matter how much I had resented her for what happened, there was a time when I had loved her deeply. But love couldn't survive where trust had been broken, and our relationship's foundation had crumbled long before I walked out that door. Tonight, she had tried to explain herself, to make me understand that she had been manipulated, that it wasn't her fault. And maybe there was some truth in that. Maybe Brittany had crossed lines, pushed her further than she should have. But in the end, it didn't change anything. Danielle had made her choices, just as I had made mine, and now we were both living with the consequences. But what I had now was so much better. With Megan, there was no chaos, no drama. She was steady, reliable, everything I had been missing when I was with Danielle. There wasn't a part of me that wanted to go back to that old life, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace with that. Megan shifted beside me, snuggling closer as the movie played on. I glanced down at her, feeling a wave of affection wash over me. Megan had been so patient, so understanding as I worked through everything. She never asked for more than I was ready to give, and because of that, I was able to open up to her in ways I never thought I could again. You know, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, I don't think I ever really thanked you. She looked up at me, raising an eyebrow. For what? For just being here. For letting me deal with all of this in my own way. For never pushing me to be something I wasn't ready to be. I know it couldn't have been easy, but you never made me feel like I was failing. Megan smiled, her eyes softening as she reached up and gently touched my face. Nick, you don't have to thank me for that. I knew what I was getting into when we started this. I knew there were things you needed to work through. But I also knew you'd get through them when you were ready. And you did. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I guess I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. How much I appreciate you. Her smile widened, and she leaned in to kiss me softly. I appreciate you too. We sat there in comfortable silence after that, the movie playing in the background, but my thoughts were already somewhere else. I kept thinking about how lucky I was to have found Megan, to have someone who understood me in ways no one else ever had. I had gone through so much to get here, but in the end, it had all been worth it. Every misstep, every heartbreak, had led me to her. As the credits finally rolled, Megan stretched and yawned, giving me a sleepy smile. Well, that was fun. But I think I'm ready for bed. I nodded, feeling the exhaustion of the day catch up with me as well. Yeah, me too. We turned off the TV and headed to the bedroom, falling into the familiar routine that had become such a comforting part of my life. As we climbed into bed, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Danielle's return had stirred up a lot of old emotions, but it had also given me something I hadn't expected: closure. I had finally faced the past, confronted the ghosts that had haunted me for so long. And now, they were gone. I could truly move forward without looking back. Megan curled up beside me, her breathing slow and steady as she drifted off to sleep. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the peace that surrounded me. It was a new chapter, and I was ready for whatever came next. With that thought, I closed my eyes, letting sleep take over, knowing that, for the first time in years, I had truly left the past behind. There was no rush, no urgency to fill the silence. Just the two of us standing there, wrapped in the stillness, knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it together. After a while, Megan stepped back, slipping her hand into mine with a playful look. "So, what do you want to do now? We could stay in, watch a movie, or... I don't know. I'm open to ideas." I chuckled, loving how she always knew how to ease the moment. "Honestly, after today, something low-key sounds perfect. How about we just put on a movie and relax?" She grinned and tugged me toward the couch. "That sounds like the perfect plan." We settled in, the soft glow of the TV casting a warm light across the room as we scrolled through movie options. It was such a simple thing, sitting on the couch with Megan, her head resting on my shoulder as we debated what to watch. But in moments like this, I realized just how much my life had changed, and all for the better. As the opening credits of some action movie we picked half-heartedly started rolling, my mind drifted back to Danielle for a split second. But it wasn't like before, not with the same anger or confusion. It was just a fleeting thought, a flicker of the past, quickly replaced by the reality of what I had now. Danielle and I had been through a lot. And no matter how much I'd resented her for what she did, there was a time when I'd loved her deeply. But love can't survive without trust. The foundation of our relationship had crumbled long before I walked out that door. She had tried to explain herself tonight, to make me understand that she had been manipulated, that it wasn't entirely her fault. Maybe there was some truth to that. Maybe Brittany had crossed lines she shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, it didn't change anything. Danielle had made her choices, just as I had made mine. We were both living with the consequences. But what I had now was so much better. With Megan, there was no chaos, no drama. She was steady, reliable, everything I'd been missing when I was with Danielle. There wasn't a single part of me that wanted to return to that old life, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace with that. Megan shifted slightly beside me, snuggling closer as the movie played on. I glanced down at her, feeling a wave of affection wash over me. She had been so patient, so understanding as I worked through everything. She never asked for more than I was ready to give, and because of that, I was able to open up to her in ways I never thought I could again. "You know," I said softly, my voice barely louder than a whisper, "I don't think I ever really thanked you." She looked up at me, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" "For just being here. For letting me deal with all of this in my own way. For never pushing me to be something I wasn't ready to be. I know it couldn't have been easy, but you never made me feel like I was failing." Megan smiled, her eyes softening as she reached up to gently touch my face. "Nick, you don't have to thank me for that. I knew what I was getting into when we started this. I knew there were things you needed to work through. But I also knew you'd get through them when you were ready. And you did." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. How much I appreciate you." Her smile widened, and she leaned in to kiss me softly. "I appreciate you too," Megan whispered softly. We sat there in comfortable silence after that, watching the movie, though my mind had already wandered elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about how lucky I was to have found her, someone who understood me in ways no one else ever had. I had gone through hell to get to this point, but looking back, every misstep and heartbreak had been worth it. They had all led me to Megan. As the credits rolled, Megan stretched and let out a soft yawn, giving me a sleepy smile. Well, that was fun, but I think I'm ready for bed. I nodded, feeling the weight of the day catching up with me as well. Yeah, me too. We turned off the TV and made our way to the bedroom, slipping easily into the comfort of our familiar routine. As we climbed into bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. Danielle's return had stirred up a lot of old emotions, but it had also brought me something unexpected: closure. I had finally faced the past, confronted the ghosts that had haunted me for so long, and now they were gone. I could move forward without looking back. Megan curled up beside me, her breathing slow and steady as she drifted off to sleep. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the peaceful stillness of the room surround me. It was a new chapter, and I felt ready for whatever came next. With that thought, I closed my eyes, letting sleep take over, knowing that for the first time in years, I had truly left the past behind.